Okay, guys, so session 2, we'll be talking about the Col Regs, or the International Regulations for Prevention of Collision at Sea. As I said, this is not really going to be a lecture on what lights have this and what shapes have that. That is a case of learning. This is more going through some of the written rules and, some of the ideas behind what it's meant by the Col Regs. So what we'll go through is we'll go through some of the general rules and we'll highlight them. Okay, and then I'll go specifically through the steering and sailing rules, specifically 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 to 19. And then obviously some conclusions and Q&As. And then if anybody wants a copy of them, I can give them a link for the actual rules themselves. Okay, so to start, general rules, part A, which is rules 1 to 3. Now, the Col Regs is broken up into various different parts, and then each rule has a rule number, and then within each rule number there's a whole bunch of sub rules. So I'm just going to put the main rule numbers on them. So rule 1 is where they apply. Now again, there's more parts to rule 1 application, but this is kind of the highlighted part that I'm bringing out. And so these rules apply to all vessels upon the high seas and all waters connected to the high seas and navigable by seagoing vessels, which effectively means Switzerland is a seagoing country, because seagoing vessels can make it all the way up the Rhine River to Switzerland, to Basel. Okay, so that makes it no longer a landlocked country. Okay, Chesapeake Bay, you can get all the way up to Washington, D.C., Hudson River, etc., etc. Ability for ships to get up those rivers, which means the rules apply to them, not just at sea. However, Lake Michigan, Lake Victoria, Lake Geneva, seagoing vessels can't get there. So the rules don't apply on those lakes. Okay, so it's specifically areas where seagoing vessels can make. So for instance, the seagoing vessels can make it up the Thames. So these rules apply up the Thames as well. Okay. The responsibility, this is rule number 2. Okay. Nothing in the rules will exonerate any vessel or owner, master or crew of any neglect to comply with these rules, and I've highlighted the words here, required by the ordinary practice of seamen. A lot of these rules talk about the ordinary practice of seamen or good seamanship. Okay, what this rule really means, if there is a potential of a collision, and even if you're supposed to be the stand-on vessel, the rules won't get you out of trouble if you don't try and avoid collision. So unlike cars, where you've got right of way and another car is a giveaway, at sea, you're either stand on or give way. There is no such thing as right of way. You literally don't get right of way. So if you believe a collision is going to happen, it is still your responsibility to move and make sure you get out of the way and avoid collision. So, and there's nothing in these rules that will get you out of that. Okay, a couple of the definitions, and again, there's lots of definitions, so I'm going to definition number B, a power-driven vessel. It means it's any vessel propelled by machinery. Okay, so that is 90% of all vessels at sea. So this huge super container carrier here is a power-driven vessel. That's all he is. He may be huge, he may be this, he may be that, he's just a power-driven vessel. Okay? A sailing vessel, which is termed C, okay, means that we're not using any propelling machinery. Even if it's fitted, we're not using it. Okay? So we are literally using sails only to propel ourselves. A vessel engaged in fishing, and I've done a little highlight here on the picture, so you can see day shape for that. Two little cones pointing at each other. Means of a vessel fishing with nets, lines, trawls, or other fishing apparatus, which is, and most importantly here, restricts maneuverability, but does not include fishing vessels with trolling lines or other fishing apparatus, which does not restrict that maneuverability. So this guy, he can maneuver around no problem. He's just got some lines out and he can maneuver. This guy who's got big trolling nets out, he can't maneuver. So he falls under this rule. This big ski boat, he doesn't. He can maneuver all he wants. There's no restriction in his maneuvering. So fishing, you must be restricted in your maneuverability. Okay? The term vessel not under command. Okay? It doesn't mean the skipper's completely drunk downstairs and you don't know what you're doing. It means that something has gone wrong and you can't abide by the rules. So here's your day shape, again circled, two black balls. If you ever see two black balls at sea, and we'll go through that as we go through the various presentations, but two black balls just means danger, stay away at any stage. But a vessel not under command, broken down, disabled, damaged, it could be steering, it could be mechanical, it could be any reason why a vessel is not under command. It might even, in this case, you can see the photograph, there's actually a fire on deck. You can actually see the smoke coming off here. So a vessel not under command could be many reasons why, and what it means is that vessel can't abide by these rules in any way. You can't turn to avoid collision, you maybe can't slow down, maybe you can't speed up, doesn't matter, you just can't abide by the rules. Then we've got what we call restricted inability to maneuver, or RAM vessels. And again, there's a little picture of the day shape, so it's a ball, diamond ball. So there's your day shape for a restricted inability maneuver. So a restricted inability maneuver is a vessel, in brief, which is usually a working vessel, and due to their work, they can't maneuver. Okay, so it might be a vessel engaged in laying, servicing, or picking up navigational marks, submarine cables, or pipelines. So now they've got things over the side, and therefore they can't maneuver or avoid. Engaged in dredging, or surveying, or underwater operations. Once again, they've got things over the side and they can't maneuver. So if we look at the picture here, there's our ball, diamond, ball day shape. We've got two black balls, two diamonds. Black balls means keeps away. Keep away from black balls. Diamond side, you may pass. So if you look at the picture, you can actually see here's where the boat is working. On the ball side, avoid it. Diamond side, you're fine. At nighttime, you have a red, white, red, and then two red lights. That's the obscured side. You can't work that, you can't go that side. Two greens, you can go that side. And that makes perfect sense if you think of a traffic light. Go to the green, don't go to the red. Okay. A vessel engaged in replenishing or transferring of persons, provisions, and cargoes while underway. These two vessels are moving things between them. They obviously have to hold course and speed while this comes across. They obviously can't avoid collision. So he becomes RAM, restricted inability to maneuver. A vessel engaged in launching or recovery of aircraft. So you'd think, oh, okay, aircraft carriers, they can do what they want. It's not the aircraft carriers that are the problem. It's the super yachts. You've got a rich guy and he wants to land his helicopter on his boat. That super yacht now has to maneuver, so he's going into the wind at a certain speed that the pilot wants, so the pilot can land a helicopter. So it's not just aircraft carriers and things. And then You obviously want to stay away from these guys. Anybody doing mine clearance, anybody engaged in mine clearance operations. You don't want to go anywhere near somebody who's pulling explosives out of the ocean. Please note the difference in the shapes. The mine clearance has 3 black balls in a small triangle or 3 green lights. So he doesn't actually hold the ball diamond ball. So that tells you he's not just a restricted, it also tells you he's doing mine clearance. Okay, and then any vessel towing. So it could be a tug, but if you're involved in towing operations, you're obviously restricted in your ability to deviate from your course. So towing vessels, you know, they can't just turn out of somebody's way. So that's our sort of overall RAM. So we can look at it and say, okay, that's going to be usually a working vessel that can't move. They've got divers in the ocean. They can't just leave them there to move out of the way for you. They've got gear at the bottom of the ocean. They can't move. They're lifting gear, dropping gear. They're recovering aircraft. They're towing somebody. All this type of working stuff makes them a RAM vessel. Okay. The vessel constrained by her draft. Okay. It's a power-driven vessel which, because of her draft, in relation to the available depth and the width of the navigable water, is restricted or severely restricted in her ability to deviate from her course. In other words, if she goes too far to port or too far to starboard, she's going to hit the bottom or land or a dock. So she is literally restricted. You'll note the day shape here is a cylinder, long thin cylinder, or at night you see 3 reds. One of the things that I'm pointing out on this particular picture, you can have 3 reds, but you will still have normal running lights. A restricted ability, for instance, if you're at anchor, you can have all your restricted ability lights, but you can also have your anchor lights. If you're fishing, you can still have fishing lights and running lights, or anchor lights if you've anchored. So don't just think when you see special lights, that's the only lights you'll find on a boat. Okay. The word underway. This comes into Rule 3 section, which is the general definitions again, and now we're on I. It basically means you're not at anchor, you're not made fast to the shore, or you're not aground. You're not touching land in any way. Doesn't mean you're moving. It just means you're not touching land. So underway is literally you're just not touching land. So an anchor, you've dropped an anchor, there you go, you're touching the ground. Made fast, well, you're obviously tied up. Aground, you're obviously on the ground. Okay, what it does mean, even at anchor, there are still rules for you. But if you're not underway, if you're at anchor, it means you can't avoid, somebody has to avoid you because your motor's not working, you're not moving. If you're tied up to a dock, you know, you can't avoid a collision if somebody's coming at you because you're tied there. If you're aground, same thing. So underway is quite an important term. Okay, not connected to land in any way. Okay, so next little section, steering and sailing rules. And as I say again, this is highlighted. This is not the entire rule book. So please don't use this as your complete rule book. Okay. So steering and sailing rules. Lookout, rule number 5. Okay. Lookout is all vessels at all times shall maintain a proper lookout by sight and hearing, as well as all available means appropriate to the prevailing circumstances and conditions, so as to make a full appraisal of the situation of risk of collision. What does all that mean? It basically means everybody must keep lookout. Now, your proper lookout needs to be by sight and hearing. and all available means appropriate to the prevailing circumstances and conditions. That means if you're in a perfectly beautiful day out there and you can see for 3, 8, 10 miles, doesn't matter, you don't need to have somebody staring over a radar because you can see what's going on. Inversely, if you're in quite thick fog, the prevailing circumstances state, because you can't see far, use the radar. So that's what it's talking about, circumstances and conditions. Okay, and the whole lot is to make sure there's no risk of collision. So when we're sailing along, we want to keep looking ahead and behind and to port and to starboard. And then if it gets a bit foggy, turn the radar on, keep an eye on that as well. So we're trying to keep as much of a lookout to be able to see other vessels and appraise any problems. Safe speed. I'm not entirely sure this photograph isn't a little bit of computer cleverness, because I'm sure if you put that many 25s on the back of that little fishing boat, it would flip over. But I did think it looked like a good shot for safe speed. Okay, so every vessel shall at all times, again, all of us, proceed at a safe speed so that she can take proper and effective action to avoid collision and to be stopped within appropriate and prevailing circumstances, conditions. Same thing again. In determining safe speed, we need to look at the following factors. Okay. Visibility. Well, if you look at this photograph here and you come flying along at high speed, you just bump into each other, wouldn't you? Traffic density. I mean, you're not going to even drive on a motorway at high speed, start weaving your way through and hope for the best. Why would you do it on a boat? Maneuverability. If your boat doesn't turn properly, or if it's turned slowly or that sort of thing, slow down. Backlighting. Backlighting, as you're approaching a city, and I think anybody who's approached a city at night, half of you have already, and you're looking for that finish mark, that one little buoy that's flashing white, and you're desperately trying to find it. You can see what backlighting is all about then. The state of the wind, the sea, and the currents, okay, and proximity to navigational hazards. So the conditions and what's happening around you. And then, of course, how deep is your boat, your draft? Do you need to worry about hitting the bottom? So these are the 6 main factors in A that come into safe speed. So here's a little acronym for you to remember the 6 of them. Very terrific men drink cold beer. So visibility, traffic, maneuverability, draft, conditions, and background light. A quick and easy acronym for remembering the 6 sections of safe speed A. Risk of collision. I'm not entirely sure I'd want to do that. Sail in front of some huge ship with a skiff. Just doesn't seem like the right thing to do. Anyway, every vessel shall use all available means appropriate to the prevailing circumstances and conditions, there we're back to that thing, to determine if a risk of collision exists. If there is any doubt, the risk shall be deemed to exist. In other words, if in doubt, assume you're going to crash. Assume that there's a risk, do something about it. If there's doubt, there's no doubt. Okay? How do we work that out? There's the vessel we're watching. There's our vessel. And we're looking across. We take a bearing. We get closer. The bearing hasn't changed. We get closer. The bearing is still constant. We get closer. The bearing's even closer. We're closer and closer and closer, and we have a constant bearing closing range. Handheld compass on deck, just lining up with the stanchion, just at a distance. Oh, is he coming closer? Is he not? Constant bearing closing range. will tell you if you've got a collision coming. What happens if you find that? What action do we avoid? Action to avoid. Okay. Any action needs to be within all the parts of the rules, blah, blah, blah. But the main part is be positive, made in ample time with due regard and observation for good seamanship. So what that means is turn nice and hard, make it early, and make sure you're not turning into another collision position. Due regard for good seamanship. I remember we mentioned in the beginning good seamanship. So a nice big turn, so the other boat can observe that you made a turn. Make it early. You're not going to put yourself too close. And don't turn into another collision area or into something that's going to endanger yourself or another boat. Okay. Action to avoid collision is pretty much exactly the same. It's large enough to be readily apparent to another vessel observing visually or by radar. A succession of small alterations of course and or speed should be avoided. So that goes back to what we said now, turn hard, so you can see you've turned. Small little turns or a gentle slowdown, the other vessel might not even notice it. They're looking for some distinct change. A good way of looking at it is, I'm making a turn so that they can see a change in my lights aspect. Then they can see I've made a change. Okay, gentle turns don't work. Gentle slowdowns don't work. Narrow channels, rule number 9. Stay on the starboard side. So if I say stay on the starboard side, it means boats are always going to be passing port to port. And we'll talk about that in a minute. If you're less than 20 meters of a sailing vessel, you mustn't impede bigger vessels. Well, that kind of makes sense. If you're fishing, you shall not impede the passage of other vessels. Again, it's a narrow channel. Traffic separation schemes. Okay. So these ships have got to travel in the correct lane. So your big ships, these big ships are now forced into this lane as they come up and down this section of coast, and they've got to travel there, whether they're going south or north in this particular case. So the north going guys in this one have to be in D, South C, South B, North A. They have no choice. So ships are forced in there. So we want to avoid crossing them at all costs. But if you have to do so presenting the biggest possible picture, so at right angles. Don't try and sort of sneak in and cut across and what have you. You want to make a nice big right angle cross. Okay. However, you're far better off just using the inshore traffic zone. So vessels under 20 meters and sailing vessels, fishing vessels engaged in fishing should use the inshore traffic zone. In other words, stay out of them. We've got no real place in there with small boats. Avoid anchoring. And the word avoid is there because if something goes terribly wrong and you have to anchor, then you have to anchor. Vessels of less than 20 meters in length or sailing vessel shall not impede the safe passage of power-driven vessels following the lane. So in other words, don't just sail in front of somebody here. You can't, these guys have been forced in there and they've got to hold their course and speed, big ships. They're not going to turn around you. They have to hold it, so you can't impede them. And then offshore racing rules mostly prohibit entry into such lanes. The clipper race does. We're not allowed in them at all as the clipper race boats. We have to actually avoid them, which is quite normal, and I think it's a good thing. Okay, rule 12, sailing vessels. Sailing vessels, starboard tack is stand on. So when the wind is coming over your starboard side, you're on starboard tack, you are the stand-on vessel. So the one with the nice brown sails here, the wind's coming over his starboard side, he's the starboard tacker. Port tack, when the wind's coming over your port side, is your give way. So you can see that boat there is wind's coming over his port side, and this one here, wind's coming over the port side. He will give way. He will go round the back of the starboard tacker. If starboard and port stay on top, however, if you're on the same tack, the windward boat gives way. The leeward boat is your stand-on. In other words, doesn't matter, port and starboard, that overrides this. However, if you're on the same tack, the person closest to the wind is give way. If you're overtaking, the overtaking vessel is give way. Okay? Vessel being overtaken, hold your course and speed. Remains clear until he's overtaken. If you're over here, now obviously if this is the overtaking area and vessel B is heading in this direction and he's coming behind the other boat, well, it doesn't matter. He might be in the overtaking area, but he's not being overtaken. He's just going a different direction. Only if you're overtaking. Okay. Head-ons. Now we're talking more about power-driven vessels. Okay. Both vessels change course to starboard to avoid collision. Now we go back to our pass port to port. Passing port to port. So if we think back to where we had the narrow channels, stay on the starboard side, therefore you pass port to port. A crossing situation, exactly the same thing. This vessel's going that way. This is your giveaway vessel. He turns, and guess what? They pass port to port again. And he goes around his back. So if you see red, you give way and pass port to port. If you're in a narrow channel, you pass port to port. If you're head on, you pass port to port. If you're in a crossing situation, you pass port to port. So if you see red, you're the giveaway. What do you do if you're the giveaway vessel? Action by giveaway vessel, and it goes exactly what we said earlier. Take early and substantial action to keep well clear. This is way too late. The sailing boat, I mean, to take a photograph like that of a fishing boat, you're way, way, way too close. Okay? What do you do if you're the stand-on vessel? Now, this is a boat that decided to slow down. You maintain your course and speed, which means the other boat knows where you're going and what speed you're doing, so he can plan his overtake or his crossing maneuver without putting the two of you in danger. However, if you go back to rule about responsibility and you think that the other boat is not going to make it and you still got a collision, you then need to take action if necessary and avoid turning to port. Because if he is turning to try and get round your stern and you turn to port, you're going to turn towards him. Okay, now the responsibility between vessels. Whom gives way to whom on the water? So we've put a little thing here together. Everybody gives way to not under command. He's not under command. He can't abide by the rules. He can't do a thing. Everybody gives way to him. Next, ram vessels. He's got divers down there and he can't leave them. He's about to recover a helicopter and he can't suddenly change course. Helicopter will crash into his deck. Okay, now I've put constrained by draft in here. It's not actually in here in the Col Regs, but it fits very nicely here. This guy's driving along in a channel and he literally can't turn. He can slow down or speed up, but that's it. He can't turn. So avoid him. engaged by fishing, sailing vessels, and then our power-driven vessels. So a normal power-driven vessel literally has to give way to everybody, and then we give way to everybody above us, etc., etc. And then we've got conduct in restricted visibility. I'm just going top line on this one. This is for vessels not in sight of one another. And I'm going to point this out. When navigating in or near an area of restricted visibility, you don't actually have to be in it. You can be sailing along in perfect sunshine with a mist bank coming in next to you, and you could well have a big ship hiding in that mist and you don't know it's there. A power-driven vessel shall have her engines ready for immediate maneuver. Fairly obvious reasons. Okay. Now, the following should be avoided. An alteration, of course, to port for a vessel forward of the beam other than the vessel being overtaken, and an alteration towards a vessel abeam or after a beam. So that now, to put that in nice plain English, you're the boat in the middle. If someone's forward to your starboard side, don't turn to port. Okay? Someone's there, don't turn to port. Someone's here, don't turn to port. Someone's here, you don't turn to starboard. So that's what that little rule means. If we go back through it, don't turn to starboard. So that's what the rule top line means. Okay, so finishing up, as I said, we are literally just scratching the surface there. There's lots and lots and lots of other rules that was highlighted. And please don't, and I repeat again, please don't just use this presentation as stuff to learn. If you want to pass your exams, there are a lot more to learn. There's all the light, shapes, sounds, etc. Plus, there are a lot of additional other bits and pieces within the rules, within the written rules. So that really is just scratching the surface, but it gives you a nice general idea. So next time you see a vessel at sea, you can go, okay, he's got a red, white, red on, that's a ram vessel, you know. Okay, you can get the full ColRegs online, you can get them at good chandleries, you know, there's lots of different places you can get it. Literally, you can download a PDF online for free. Okay. When you learn the ColRegs, a lot of people focus on the light, sounds, and shapes for their exams. You can also be asked about safe speed. You can also be asked about lookout. You can also be asked about TSSs and the rules of how to cross them, etc., etc. So don't just focus on light, sounds, and shapes. You've got to look at the whole big picture. Okay. Now, there are hundreds of apps out there just to assist you in learning. The one I particularly use, and I'm not sure if it comes out on Apple, I've got an Android. It's an app called Marinus, and it gives you the flags, it gives you a little bit of meteorology, plus it gives you the full ColRegs on your phone, instant reference. And I think it cost me something like $5, so it's not terribly expensive. Okay, so before some questions, next week we're going to start looking at position, course, and speed. So we'll look at latitude and longitude and where it comes from and what it's all about. We'll look at the knowledge of standard navigational terms, just the things we use on board. We'll look at some true bearings and courses, and then we'll look at our speed, the knot. With that, any questions, guys? Either unmute yourselves, ask any questions, or pop it on the chat.